In this lecture, we're going to solder on our battery connector, finish building the drone frame, and begin to mount the flight controller onto the drone. If we zoom in on the distribution board here, you can see that we have a positive and negative terminal. Now this is where your battery connector gets soldered to. If you remember, positive means red wire and negative means black wire. If you grab your male XT60 connector, you can also notice that on there is a plus and minus sign. This correlates with positive and negative. So you would want to make sure you solder the red wire onto the positive side XT60 connector and also connect that to the plus sign on the distribution board. Now to do this, you can just use some regular wire. I had a old ESC, so I cut those red and black wires out of there and soldered that on. I then went ahead and just soldered the red wire onto the positive and the black wire onto the negative. One tip when you solder these XT60 connectors is, if you notice, you have two pins in your XT60 connector, and sometimes when you go to solder, these pins get moved with the heat. One thing you can do is you can connect your male XT60 connector to a female XT60 connector and then go ahead and solder. This way your male prongs will stay intact while it's connected with the female XT60 connector. Once you solder on your battery connector, you are finished with soldering for this build. You can go ahead and put away your soldering iron and solder. You can also go ahead and see if your battery fits in the frame. One of the reasons I added hot glue on the solders, besides preventing short circuits, was because it'll be easy for the battery to slide across the frame. In this way, the battery won't get caught in the solders and maybe rip and explode. After you solder on your battery connector, we're going to take the top plate from the frame kit and mount that on. Also, don't forget to take some hot glue and put that on your battery connector solder. You're also going to want to grab those small screws again and use that to mount the top plate from the top. You're going to simply repeat this step for all of the screws. At the end, you should have one small screw remaining. They give this as an extra. Once we have our top plate mounted with the screws, we're going to start to connect our motors to our ESCs. So to do this and to make it more cleaner, I passed those motor wires through the frame onto the bottom, and then I connected them to the ESC on the bottom of the arms. I then took some rubber bands and just rubber banded the ESCs to the arm. Usually we use zip ties, but I didn't have anything handy. You could also choose to glue on your ESCs onto your arms. However, if the ESCs heat up, the glue might fall off and your drone may become unstable and crash. Before we move on to mounting the flight controller onto the drone, we want to make sure all our solders and connections are strong. So we can simply connect a battery to our battery connector and see if all 4 ESCs respond by making a beeping sound. In this way, we can make sure the electricity is traveling throughout the board. Next, we're going to grab our receiver. Now, I tend to use Velcro for this, as it's easier to take off the receiver if I need to anytime. I also want to mount the receiver on the back of the drone, as it's easier for it to catch signals. Once the receiver is secured on the back of the drone frame, we can go ahead and grab our flight controller. Now I'm going to be keeping the flight controller in its packing box, as this packing box not only keeps the flight controller stable, but it also reduces vibrations, making for a much more stable drone. The KK2 flight controller is also not compatible with this frame, meaning that the screws don't align. As a result, I'm also going to Velcro the flight controller directly onto the frame. Once you have your receiver fitted nicely with the drone frame as well as the flight controller, you are one step closer to completing your drone. In the next lecture, we're going to start programming the flight controller, plugging in the ESC wires, and calibrating the ESCs.